Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for one of our annual Talk with Texas RE installments. Today, we'll be discussing the 2025 Assessment of Reliability Performance here with our Director of Reliability Services, Mr. David Penny, and supported by one of our absolutely tallest reliability engineers, Mr. Eric Newnham. Before we get to this, however, we've got just a few things to go over. First, of course, is our antitrust admonition. I will remind you that I will, instead of reading you the entire thing, just say that if you have any questions about it, that you can contact Texas RE's General Counsel. Other upcoming Talk with Texas REs you can see on your screen right now. We've got a whole bunch of these scheduled throughout the year. The next one we're going to have scheduled is on June 23rd, and that's going to be the integration of large loads. Registration and information on all of these events is available on the Texas RE calendar. Also on our calendar are our major events that are coming up throughout the year. The next one is going to be our winter weatherization workshop. That's going to be on August 19th. The agenda and speaker information is not yet posted. It will be in the near future, but if you would like to get registered, you can go to our website and you can do that now. I will remind folks that this one is going to be entirely virtual, so there will be no in-person attendance for that one, so do keep that in mind. The rest of the ERO enterprise is also hard at work on events of their own. You can see a list of a few of those that are upcoming right here. Links to all of these is available in today's presentation materials, which are currently posted to the training page on our website, and I will get that link added to chat as soon as David gets rolling. As I mentioned to those of you who got here earlier, we are using Slido today for questions and answers. If you have any questions during today's presentation, you can submit those at slido.com using the code TXRE, or you can scan the QR code in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. So that's everything that I wanted to say. David, please take it away.
All right. Thad, just want to do a quick sound check. You can hear me okay? And if you can go to the next slide, please.
Loud and clear. Yep.
All right. All right. Today, we're going to talk about a report that we've been putting out annually for almost over 12 years now. We call it our Assessment of Reliability Performance. This report is basically something we try to put together in our role as the regional entity to provide an independent review of what we see as the trends related to performance metrics and other analytics that we perform related to the reliability of the bulk power system here within the ERCOT or Texas RE region. Like I said, we've been putting this together for many, many years now, and we're continuing to evolve the report over time and make improvements as we get access to additional data sources and improve the analytics that we have at our disposal. So we're always looking to improve this product. One of the changes we're making this year is in previous years, we had a combined report that looked at the reliability performance assessment as well as a regional risk assessment. They were in a combined report. This year, we're going to separate those into two separate products, with our goal being to publish the regional risk assessment sometime late October, early November timeframe. So that's one of the improvements we're trying to make going forward. To do this work and the performance analysis, we bring in a multitude of data sources from Section 1600 data like TADS, GADS, and MIDAS, et cetera, as well as ERCOT data sets that we have access to, and as well as real-time data that's accumulated in our PI system. So we have a vast amount of data that we can do these analytics and perform these trend analysis on, and we'll share some of that with you today. Our goal is to publish the full report hopefully sometime next week, and when you see it, it'll be separated into two separate blocks. One will be obviously the main report, and then there'll also be a separate document with a set of appendices that does a deeper dive into some of the data and analytics that we perform. So you can look forward to that next week. If you go to the next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot, as I call at a glance, of a couple of different performance metrics and trends that we look at. The first one to look at is in the upper left-hand corner, which is the annual energy and peak demand. And one of the interesting things that shows up, or has showed up the last couple of years, is particularly summer timeframe, our peak demands have actually dropped from our all-time high in 2023 to about 83,000 gigawatts in 2025. But at the same time, our total energy is increasing, and a lot of that has to do with the some of the phenomena related to how our price-sensitive large loads, particularly Bitcoin and crypto miners, are behaving, where they tend to self-curtail during those high peak hours or high price hours, and that's kind of leading to this trend that we're seeing. And it's not only in the summertime; it also shows up in the wintertime. Most recently with Winter Storm Fern. At the same time, if you look at the graph below that, our percentage of the energy delivered by renewables is continuing to increase and will continue to increase. 2025, it was roughly 37% of the total energy was provided by renewables. Um, if you look at our misoperation trend on the top right-hand side, we did see an uptick in our misoperation rate last year. A lot of that had to do with particularly misoperations reported by generator owners, which the raw misop count more than doubled year over year from 2025 versus 2024, particularly in that class. And a vast majority of those were brand new commissioned plants that are obviously working out the bugs in some of their protection systems. So that was the partial reason for that increase in our misoperation rate. We're continuing to see steady improvement in our primary frequency response. And at the same time, same with last year, because it was a milder weather year, we did see some slight reductions in our outage rates for transmission, both 345 and 138 rates. So if you go to the next slide, please. When we look back at 2025, I'm going to separate the discussion today in two basic blocks. We're going to talk about some of the operational successes and the challenges that occurred over the course of the year, and at the same time, we're going to talk about risk mitigation efforts, which occupied a vast majority of the time within the Texas RE last year. So when you look at the operational successes last year in 2025, there were two major winter storms, Winter Storm Enzo and Kingston in January and February last year. We did set an all-time winter peak demand during Kingston in February 2025. At the same time, we had a very moderate summer. There were no major events or disturbances, no hurricanes, thank goodness, to deal with. So the summer was a very successful for us. Due to generation or transmission constraints in the far West Texas load zone, ERCOT had to implement two new IROLs for that zone in September of last year. For generation and transmission metrics, and I'll go into these a little more detail, we had some increases in those metrics, which were primarily affected by long-term or extended forced outages. And as I mentioned earlier, we've had a continued improvement in our primary frequency response. But one of I'd say, the small signal type events we're starting to see more and more of is related to oscillations from IBRs, and I'll go into more detail in that. On the risk mitigation side, a lot of, I'll say, blood, sweat, and tears has been spilled on this side of the efforts we undertook last year. Large load integration obviously drove many activities. Many of y'all are well aware of those activities, and we'll go into a little bit more details at that. ERCOT had a very successful implementation of the changes to the ERCOT market, implementing real-time co-optimization. That project was finalized in December and was very successful. A couple of other improvements on the risk side were some of the operating guide and planning guide revision requests to implement advanced grid support or grid forming technologies on battery energy storage systems. We're also making some changes related to how we look at our forward-looking resource and energy adequacy assessments. We implemented a pilot program, which I'll go into more detail for the regional entity of Texas RE, as well as the other NERC regions, to implement that process. And I'll go into more detail on that. And at the same time, there's many ongoing efforts under FERC Order 901 to continue to reduce the risk from IBR resources, and we'll go into more details on that. So next slide, please. So we look at our just a high-level summary with some of the performance metrics and indicators we look at. Just a little bit of background is we try to look at multiple aspects of this and how we grade these metrics. We try to look at a minimum of 5 years of data. Some of our data sets go back more than 15 years, but at a minimum, we try to look at a 5-year data to establish a trend. And then we will rate them whether the trend is improving or not improving or stable. So for last year, the the two metrics that showed up as actionable, these are tied at the hip, I'll say, related to the large load integration. The first being our future reserve margins, due to the unknown aspect of the how much and how fast the large loads are going to be integrated in the system. And the other aspect that is actionable that we're currently working on is the reliability impacts from the operational characteristics of operational loads, principally the voltage sensitivity and voltage sensitive load reductions that we've seen occurring multiple times within the region. Some of the more positive aspects, like I mentioned earlier, we've seen an improvement in transmission outage rates last year. ERCOT does an excellent job of managing IROLs, and then the primary frequency response metrics are continuing to improve as we integrate more and more batteries onto the system. So next slide, please. So I'll start getting into a little bit more detail on some of the topics now. We'll start off with winter storms and winter storm performance and generator weatherization. This has been a hot topic for many, many years, ever since Winter Storm Uri in 2021. If you look at the performance in 2025, I mentioned we did have those two major storms, Enzo in January and Kingston in February of last year. We did set an all-time winter peak of just over 80 gigawatts during Kingston. If you look at both of those storms combined, we had an incremental outage impact of about 15,000 megawatts. That's combined between both storms, primarily due to wind icing conditions, blade icing, gas restrictions, and emissions. Very few of the generator outage events were related actually to cold weather instrumentation freezing issues like we've seen in previous events. There's been ongoing efforts, for many, many years to improve our weatherization from generators, and some of the things that took place in 2025 were the collection of extreme ECWT, or extreme cold weather temperature data, which some of the couple of the maps show you that. And also under EOP 12, we're collecting cold weather constraints that can prevent some generators from being able to perform correctly during cold weather. Most of the constraints we've collected so far are related to wind blade icing, solar panel icing, cold weather packages in the nacelle of the wind turbines, as well as combustion turbine inlet icing conditions, or the lack of heat protection on those inlet air for combustion turbines that can allow those combustion turbine inlets to freeze up, which will limit their output. If you look at that map, it kind of gives you an idea of going north to south, how the ECWT temperatures are kind of grayed out across the ERCOT region, where the coldest ECWTs are obviously up north, and then they gradually get higher as you go south, which is expected. That's kind of what we're expecting when we collected that data, and the data bears that out. Next slide, please. I mentioned some of the the metrics that we're seeing that had some issues. We had noticed some issues over the year, and two of them in particular related to conventional generation forced outage rates, and another one that showed up was some of the sustained outage data, particularly to the 345 system. In particular, I'll just highlight a few things on the generator side. If you look at the coal E4 rate, equivalent forced outage rate year over year, it almost doubled from a historic average of about 12% up to about 24%. And a similar aspect on our gas turbine jet engine type, quick start type units, a similar increase there. But when you dive deeper into the data, the coal rate in particular was driven by extended outages on a couple of units. So one of those units had an outage over 14 consecutive months, and another one was 12 consecutive months, and it's still ongoing as we speak. Similar things on the gas turbine side, where they had extended outages of 3 months or longer on 9 units, and that's what drove that increase there. On the transmission side, if you look at the sustained outage duration for the entire year on our 345 system, there was a single outage at a substation related to a fire that accounted for 85% of that outage duration. That damaged an auto transformer and also kept the associated 345 line out for almost 18 months now. The things that the common thread between both of these changes in the outages is one thing: they were either catastrophic or extensive outages where the restoration or recovery was exacerbated by supply chain issues, and that has showed up several times within Texas, And to a smaller aspect, it's also showing up at the NERC level as well. So next slide, please. Uh, just to kind of give you a little bit deeper dive into some of the generation forced outage rates, I separated the outage data here between three different charts. The upper left-hand chart is for our conventional units or thermal units, and again it shows up if you look at the 5-year trend as well as the year-over-year trend, how that outage rate has jumped year over year. We are continuing to see a long-term trend increase in the if you look at the 5-year trend on the conventional units, as we get more and more renewables on the system. The wind rates and the solar rates were fairly flat and stable. For the solar fleet, I only have 2 years worth of GADS data to look at the resource force outage rates for GADS, but it did stay fairly flat year over year. And we're going to be expanding the data collection on the solar GAD side to collect more and more data. So hopefully we'll see some improvements there. Next slide, please. One of the other things we look at related to the risk areas is interdependencies between various critical infrastructure, primarily gas, water supply, and communications issues. The upper left-hand chart looks at the cumulative gas curtailments that we collect through our GAD system on conventional units, looking at the year-over-year trend. And there was a pretty big jump up in 2025, but it was not related to the winter months. When you do a deeper dive into the data, the significant part of that increase was during the summer and the fall last year, with the maximum that we recorded being on September 22nd, with a cumulative impact of just over 2,600 megawatts. Very small impacts on the water supply side. Some of that is hydro unit related. Some of it's not, but the impacts on the water supply side is minimal. The other thing we look at is communication provider issues, particularly if we're using external communication ISP providers for SCADA or other types of systems, and there were no events reported or affected ERCOT, at least ERCOT entities in 2025. So that's a very positive note. Next slide, please. One of my favorite topics is related to inertia and frequency response, and we're definitely starting to see some trends in the inertia area. Inertia historically has been a very slow moving trend as the resource mixes changes, but since the resource mix is starting to change more rapidly, we're starting to see some more rapid changes related to inertia. When you look at the chart in the upper left-hand corner, what that chart is showing is it's got inertia on the vertical axis and the percentage of load that's served by renewables on the horizontal axis. That the horizontal dotted line at the 100,000 mark is the critical inertia level that ERCOT has calculated to be able to withstand a BAL3 type contingency event. So it's something that's a line we don't want to cross. And to kind of give you some context, the blue dots with that yellow regression line is 2021. The green dots and the red regression line is 2025. And you kind of see how the trend is starting to flatten out somewhat. But the main thing I want to draw your attention to is that bottom right-hand corner of the chart. We're starting to see many, many more hours where our renewable penetration is over 70% or is 70% of the load. And the table that's in the upper right-hand corner kind of gives you some context as far as the number of hours year over year. We're starting to see that trend accelerate from 1 hour in 2023 to 160 in 2025. And if you look at 2026 through the end of April, we've already blown way past 2025 numbers with 250 hours. So that trend is accelerating. One of the other interesting things related to inertia is we're seeing our lowest inertia hours are shifting. Historically, 3 or 4 years ago, our lowest inertia hours were at nighttime in March, 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning under very high wind conditions and very low load conditions. That's beginning to change. And in 2025, for example, some of our lowest inertia hours are now in the middle of the day as we get more and more solar generation on the system. So even that is starting to change. I mentioned some of I'll say, small signal type events that we're starting to see, and just to kind of draw your attention on oscillation events, we're starting to detect more and more as we get IBR units increasing on the system. Uh, looking at 2024 and 2025, it's roughly 60 events. I think 3 more events so far that I've seen so far in 2025, 2026. And I kind of shared a couple of graphs from our Pi system of what some of these oscillation events are looking like. The little oscillation event on that the top left hand is actually a large load that when it ramped up to just over 300 megawatts, some control problems within that site caused the megawatts to oscillate, and they had to be asked to back down. Uh, the chart right below that is a battery that started oscillating its megavar output and caused some localized voltage issues in the 345 system to which it was connected. And then the two charts on the right-hand side are actually both solar plants that started oscillating their megawatt output. One was during a high peak part of the day, and the other one was during a solar ramp down period, which we detected through some small frequency variations that we were seeing because of the megawatt swings. And so this is something we're going to have to keep watching as we get more and more IBRs on the system. Don't expect this problem to go away anytime soon. They are very hard to detect. So it's something we really have to be looking for to be able to find these types of oscillation events. On the positive side, most of these events are very localized in nature. They don't affect a wide range of the right part of the BPS, but if they hit a resonant frequency point, it is something that could lead to a larger event. So that's something we have to be very cognizant of. Next slide, please. A lot of activity on the transmission side. I mentioned the 2 IROLs for the West Texas, far West Texas load pocket. The map on the upper left-hand side kind of shows the issues there. Those were due to a transmission limitations, thermal constraints on the 345 system in particular that feed that zone. We're seeing extensive load growth in that area. And when we get into conditions where there's very low wind or very low solar in that area, we can exceed the thermal limits of those lines. And that's why ERCOT created those 2 new IROLs. ERCOT has mitigation plans in place to mitigate the impact of those IRLs, so I don't expect anything major to happen there, but again, that problem's not going to go away anytime soon. Primarily because the projects that are going to be required to reduce those IRLs are tied in with the 765 projects, which is the map that's right below that. I gave you kind of an indication of the load growth in that far west zone on the bottom right hand side. If you look at 2025 versus 2024, the year-over-year growth, we saw an almost 19% increase in the peak demand in that zone and a 12% increase in energy in that zone. So it's projected to hit 19 gigawatts by 2030. So again, this problem's not going to go away anytime soon. It's something we're going to have to be in a position to manage. There is a lot of obvious improvements going on with the transmission system, and I kind of gave you some of the numbers of projects that were completed from the transmission project tracking forms, as well as line miles that were added to within our TAD system over the course of the year. So a lot of good work going on to improve this, the availability of the generation to be able to move that energy between where the generation is located to the load zones. So outstanding work there. The 765 project is ongoing. Phase 1 of the STEP plan was approved by the commission last year, and additional projects were endorsed by the ERCOT board back in December. So next slide, please. One of the last things I want to talk about on the operational side is around resilience in extreme days. Like I mentioned, 2025 was a fairly mild year from a weather perspective, but weather and failed equipment continue to drive the resilience metrics that we look at as far as outage occurrence rates and outage durations. I mentioned the failed equipment with that 345 auto transformer that had an extensive impact on the resilience metrics this year. But some positive notes on the resilience side. There were two major things that occurred to improve our resilience last year, and both of them were related to Black Start. The Public Utility Commission completed its inaugural, they call it the Black Star TX exercise back in September. That was the first time they ever occurred that to get state agencies from across the board as well as the utilities together to look at what would happen during the first 72 hours of a black start and to try to improve that communications of things that are going to happen. The second big report that came out was it was a sister report from Winter Storm Elliott that FERC completed related to Texas, and this particular report was looking at the black start issues within the eastern and western interconnections. And a lot of those recommendations from that report can also be applied here in ERCOT. So it's definitely something we need to look at and follow up on. Next slide, please. On the physical security side, this was some interesting numbers when we looked at it because we did see some declines in the number of physical security events, particularly with copper theft and intrusion. I think that in many cases this was an anomaly because if you look at the numbers NERC-wide as well as the numbers so far in 2026, that trend has definitely reversed itself. We're seeing a whole lot more copper theft in particular this year due to copper prices being what they are. So I think 2025 was a bit of an anomaly along those lines. We're seeing some of the numbers drop, but again, I fully expect that number to go back up in 2026. Next slide, please. Okay, now we'll kind of change gears and talk about a lot of the risk mitigation efforts that are going on within Texas RE and ERCOT as well as the ERCOT stakeholder process. Many of y'all are fully aware of what's going on in the large load integration efforts, so I don't want to beat a dead horse there. There was a lot of good work that happened between the various NERC working groups as well as the ERCOT working groups. A couple of major reports and white papers that came out were the white papers from the NERC groups related to emerging characteristics and risk of emerging large loads, as well as an assessment of gaps in existing practices. At the same time, we had a combined group effort between NERC, Texas RE, and ERCOT to look at voltage sensitive load loss events within ERCOT. And this was kind of a sister companion report to the initial report from the Dominion event that came out last year, and it highlighted many specific issues related to Bitcoin and crypto miners. The NERC Level 2 alert that came out last year highlighted a multitude of issues related to practices or lack of practices, I should say, on the transmission side, in particular with many TOs, probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the TOs, depending on what area you're looking at, that do not have clear or established policies or interconnection requirements for large loads. And so that's a risk that obviously has to be dealt with. And as a result of that, NERC issued a level 3 alert last month, with the data being due later this summer to get more granularity into that. On the ERCOT side, there's been, it's changing on a daily basis with so many activities going on related to large loads. And there's a listing of just a small sample of those stakeholder processes: planning guide reviews, operating guide changes, and protocol changes related to large loads. And at the same time, on the NERC side, they're looking at potential registration criteria for large loads, as well as defining what a computational load entity is, as well as some standards related to that. So a lot of work's going on, or happened last year, and that work is going to continue on and going to dominate the headlines for some time to come. Next slide, please. I mentioned, the inverter-based resource risk mitigation efforts under FERC Order 901. You can kind of see a sampling of the standards, the 6 standards that were filed within in 2025. The work is kind of, I'd say, starting to slow down, but there's still a significant amount of things that have to happen under Order 901. I know there's some standards coming up related to modeling improvements, IBR event reporting, as well as operational and planning studies, energy assurance studies. They're also falling under 901. That work's going on as we speak. As far as ERCOT rule changes, I think one of the big things that happened in 2025 was the approval of the operating guide and the planning guide changes related to providing advanced grid support or grid forming technology. basically what those two ERCOT market rules say, that for battery resources that have an SGI date after April 1st of this year, they have to at least provide the capability of providing grid forming technologies. And I think as we get further along and get more and more of those types of resources on the system, that capability is going to provide some vast improvements in particularly in stability related issues that we're seeing across the system, particularly in West Texas, where we have some weak grid conditions. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the last things to talk about is energy and resource adequacy. And I mentioned earlier we completed our pilot energy assessment study this year, and what we're trying to do here is our traditional resource adequacy studies were deterministic in nature, looking at 1 hour, either the peak summer hour or peak winter hour, and just making determination if you had sufficient resources to cover that peak during that hour. As we get more and more towards variable resources, that approach is obviously very antiquated. And so we're moving towards a more probabilistic type approach. And there's a heat map up there kind of illustrates that. What we do in these probabilistic energy studies is we bring in a vast amount of model data, looking at 40 plus years of weather data and 40 plus years of wind profile and solar profile data, load curves, et cetera. And we push all that into a model to create this probabilistic approach. And what that heat map basically shows is the hours of the day across the top and the months of the year on the vertical axis. And based on the probabilities, you can calculate expected unserved energy or loss of load hours over the course of the entire year. And the big thing it shows is where your high risk hours are. If you look at the map, you'll see that from a winter perspective, our highest risk hours are 6, 7, and 8 o'clock in the morning. And the summertime hours, it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. And that kind of bears out with what we're seeing in real time if you think about the way the grid is being operated today. Particularly in the summertime hours, even now we're seeing more and more shift in our risk hours, where they used to be around 7 o'clock at night after the solar down ramp. But as we integrated more batteries on the system, we're seeing that risk hour shift to later in the evening because the batteries are filling that void from the solar ramp down. But the batteries have duration limitations. The majority of the ERCOT fleet is about 2 hours or less. And so that's what's contributing to that shift in the resource or the risk hour to later in the evening. And so it's going to take several things to I guess, address this problem, not only more conventional fast ramping type resources, but also more batteries or extended duration capability on our battery systems to improve that. One of the other things we're trying to do is get more context around the time it takes to interconnect generation resources and compare that to the time it takes to interconnect load resources. I kind of gave you an example from the data we collected just looking at 2025 on the average time it's taken to interconnect generation resources, and for the most part it's about 1.5 to 2 year range. What we don't have is a good data set to look at the load side, particularly with the large loads that are being interconnected now, and to be able to look at, give a much better or firmer data set to be able to look at what's it going to be like 2 years or 3 years or 4 years from now. We really need to get our arms wrapped around the interconnect time for these large loads, and to be able to compare that to the time it takes to interconnect the associated generation to see where our resource or energy adequacy issues are. And that's something we're definitely working with ERCOT on to try to get a good data set to be able to do that. But we're not there yet. And that's something it's a focus for us this year. Next slide, please. Okay, the last thing to kind of talk about is Texas already has a very aggressive approach to when it comes to outreach, particularly on risk focus areas. I kind of gave you a list of what those risk focus areas were from last year's report, and some of the things that we're trying to do to, I guess, get the word out and address these risk topics. If you look at some of the things that we did last year, We had 28 different Talk with Texas RE webinars or NSRF presentations on one or more of these risk topics. We hosted a winter weatherization workshop as well as an evolving grid workshop. The other big thing we do on the compliance side is look at any associated standards and requirements to address these risk areas, and that's how we prioritize the entity engagements when you come up into the audit cycle. That we're prioritizing on these risk areas, and that's what we're going to focus on. And that kind of gives you an idea of which ones we looked at in 2025, with remote connectivity and extreme weather being two of the highest areas that we reached out on. So if you go to the next slide, please. I think I'm done. I'll open it up to any questions anybody may have.
Oh, you're never done, David. But yes, folks, if you've got any questions, please get them into Slido. We've got one queued up already for you.
Okay, the new report this year, like I mentioned, was in previous years, we had a combined report that had the assessment of reliability performance, and then there was also the regional risk assessment, and those were combined into the same report. What we're doing this year is we're separating those into two different reports. So the report that's going to come out hopefully next week is going to be the data that I just shared with you. And then the regional risk assessment is going to come out hopefully we're targeting late October, early November timeframe. So it's really not, it's not different from this one. We're just separating what we did last year into two separate reports because they are different audiences and different topics. Hopefully that answers the question.
All right, well, folks, we'll give you another minute or so to get questions in. Reminder that to submit questions, go to slido.com and use the code TXRE. David, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to share with the audience? Maybe give them a moment.
Just a couple. Again, this is like I mentioned at the onset. This is a product that we've been putting out for many years now. We're always striving to improve it and provide value to the stakeholders that we serve, to give them information they need, as well as be able to see things how we see the reliability of the grid and the performance of the grid. So we're always looking to improve that. So when the report comes out, if you have any feedback or comments, please let us know.
All right, well, David, despite my earlier statements, we have not received any questions beyond the first one. So I think that you are in fact done. Thank you so much today for sharing all this great information about our report. And folks, thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder, our next Talk with Texas RE is going to be on June 23rd. Until then, stay safe, have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Take care.